Okay, in these series of videos, we are going to be looking at issues and social problems around gender and sex. In this first video, we are going to be breaking down the question of sex and gender and what's the difference between them. In the next video, we'll be looking at gendered inequalities in our society in America. And in the third video, we're going to be digging into issues particularly pertaining to men and masculinity, and asking why we don't maybe interrogate problems of masculinity more than we do in our society. All right, so the typical breakdown that people usually understand when we talk about sex and gender, sex not meaning the act, but sex typically meaning the biological distinction between male and female bodies. And often gender is counterposed to this as being kind of the aspects of masculinity and femininity that we perform or do on a daily basis. One of the optional research articles you have is doing gender, doing heteronormativity. We'll get into more of what that latter term means, but in sociology, we talk about how people perform or do their gender through their dress and mannerisms and speech, but also how we police or not literally police, but we try to control other people's gender performances. Now, obviously on the screen now, you have the particular biology of men and women, and most people accept this binary. Men have testes, prostate, penis. They have androgen and testosterone as their hormones, and genetically are XY coded. For women, ovary, cervix, vagina, breast. These are known as primary sex characteristics, the most visible and obvious. And most of us probably would just accept this as being clear and obvious. But when theorists of gender and sex and sexuality start to look into things, the truth is that many bodies don't really clearly fit into the gender binary. For example, this is Maria Patino. She grew up as a girl and as a young woman, and she is Spanish and was very good at hurdling, a particular sport. And she was set to be a hurdler in the 1986 Olympics. She grew up with all of those external characteristics we expect. She had breasts, she had sex as a woman, and she had hormones, particularly estrogen. But when she went to the Olympics in 1986, the committee, the IOC, did a gender confirmation test. They used to do this by having what they called a nude parade, where they'd literally have athletes parade in front of judges to make sure they are the gender that they say they are. The idea behind this is that men can outcompete women and so might pretend to be a woman to win the Olympics. This, of course, never really happened. There was one instance where a Nazi was supposedly going to do this in the 30s Olympics, but this thankfully evolved into a chromosomal test. And they simply took a blood sample and confirmed your chromosomes were XX or XY. And it was very surprising to Maria Patino when she got the results of her chromosome test back. They said you were disqualified. It's because Maria Patino had XY chromosomes. So what's going on here? For her lived experience, her whole life, Maria thought she was a woman. She felt she was a woman. She had sexual intercourse as a woman. What makes her a woman and not? In this instance, Maria was androgen insensitive. What this means is that though she had XY chromosomes, her body is actually doesn't respond to androgen or testosterone, to male hormones. And all of us begin as ovaries as essentially female, and some ovaries, some embryos respond to, not ovaries, pardon me, embryos respond to androgen and then develop male sex characteristics. but she did not because she was insensitive to androgen. Externally, she was a woman, but she did not have a cervix or ovaries. She would have had male internal organs. So what does that make Maria Patino? And why are we so worried about sorting out bodies? We go through this story simply to realize that bodies are a lot more diverse than we tend to think they are. When scientists used to decide if a baby was boy or girl, when it was born, they would literally measure its genitalia and see the length of it. And if they thought it was too short, they would perform surgeries on it to make the baby female. Doctors would give the explanation that what would this boy do in the locker room when he was older? It would, because he would have small genitalia. So maybe you're giggling at this right now, but it's hardly funny business when doctors make a life-altering surgery that requires many more surgeries because they are infants, mind you, and their bodies are growing and changing. So we think bodies fall into just two categories, two sexes, but actually we spend a lot of time making bodies try to fit into these two sexes. And when people are ambiguous and trouble this binary distinction, people will often call it out. They will ask, if you have a younger sibling or know someone who has children who are somewhat gender ambiguous, people will often ask directly, try to sort them into boy or girl, male or female. Right? And this is what sex is. It's the social way in which we sort bodies. And this changes over time. If a woman used to not be able to produce children, for example, if she was barren, as it was called, which is a horrible word, she wasn't really seen as a woman. And they had all the kinds of things they would call her, a crone, a witch. But what she was not was a woman because women were seen as childbearing. In the same way, if a man can't produce children, he wasn't really seen as truly a man. So what is it in each era, in each social period that makes a person a man or a woman? This changes over time. What do we think is most significant about the body? Today we live in a hypersexualized society, and the ability to perform sex acts is often very much tied to our biological sex. And now more and more connected with a sexual identity. Maria Patino would have been known as intersex. This encompasses all people who have vague genetics and vague genitalia. Today, doctors no longer perform such horrible and invasive surgeries because people have advocated for intersex folks. They make up about 1 in 2,000 of the population, which doesn't sound like a ton, but that's a lot of intersex folks out there. Gender, on the other hand, is the behaviors and norms associated with the way we sort out these bodies. I tend to focus on gender because gender and the way we change and act towards our body is very much interrelated. So this is the way we act, we talk, we carry our body, we hold our hands. All of these go into the performance and adhering to the norms around gender, how men should be and how women should be. People may identify with the gender they are assigned on that birth certificate. This would make them cisgender in today's terminology. More and more young people in Western societies are finding that they might not entirely identify with that gender expression. And these individuals we call transgender. This does not necessarily mean people who wish to physically change their bodies from one gender to another. It simply means people who don't fully identify with the gender of male or female that they were assigned at birth. They may find themselves fluid. We'll watch a video on this for this unit on Frontline. But the key here is that the individual gender identity, the way an individual feels their gender to be, is different than the gender ascribed or put onto them at birth. One thing I want to think about is if there's a lot more diversity to two sexes, if frankly, if bodies come in all shapes and sizes, then why do we as a society spend so much time policing bodies? Why do we spend so much time trying to make sure people fit into one or two categories? Who, who benefits and who loses? Always the critical questions.